What's up, everyone? It's Alex Ragir, co-founder of Storyhunter. I'm here at the Advertising Week in New York. I'm going to be speaking with Jason Xenopoulos. He's the CEO and Chief Creative Officer of VMLY&R New York, which represents Ford, Dell, Wendy's. We're also going to be talking about jiu-jitsu and advertising. Tell us the story about how you started your own agency.
So actually, I started a couple agencies. It's been a bit of an addiction of mine, starting agencies. I always, almost by mistake, I think, because I originally studied to be a film director, and then when I went back to South Africa, I ended up starting a web development company. It was kind of the first web development company in South Africa in 1996. I think we ended up building the corporate website for every corporate in the country. But so that was a company I started in 2008. I started a branded entertainment agency called 2.0 Media, and there were kind of others in between. But I think the agency you're referring to is an agency
Native.
that I started in 2010 called Native. It was definitely the kind of one that has put me on the path that I'm on now, because it was bought by WPP, became VML South Africa, and is now VMLY&R South Africa. And of course, I'm here in New York, still part of VMLY&R. So Native very much, became a platform.
Running the New York office.
Running the New York office, I wear a couple of hats. One is as CEO of the New York office, and the other is Chief Creative Officer for North America. We have two Chief Creative Officers for North America. Myself, sort of running half of the region out of New York, and my partner runs the rest of the region out of Kansas City.
Yeah, and so the kind of training grounds in South Africa, South Africa's not necessarily, it's not like Brazil or certain places that are so known for having such a huge creative impact. But what does that feel like? Or do you think that training ground is a place where you can really build the skills to do it on a global scale?
I think so. I think South Africa is an interesting territory, not unlike Brazil actually, but just on a smaller scale. There are quite a lot of South Africans in New York. I come across them all the time, in the advertising industry, in the film industry, doing particularly well, I think, in a lot of these industries. It is a very creative environment, always punched above its weight from an advertising point of view. But in the strange sort of dynamics that all developing markets have, where you have a sort of a first world country and a third world country sort of bound together, so you end up with having access to education and technology and infrastructure, but at the same time you've got the kind of ruggedness, the slightly frontiersman pioneering aspect of a third world country. And I think that tensity between first world infrastructure and third world attitude, third world mindset, creates a kind of a scrappy creative.
Yeah, and what does that mean so starting a company, typically it's harder to get good business or consistent, it's harder.
Yes, it is harder. It's harder and it's easier in a way. It's a smaller market, so there's a lot of opportunity around. People are very entrepreneurial. It's a very entrepreneurial culture. I started Native. One of the things that there's a huge lack of is talent. So when I started Native, I knew that starting this company from the ground up, particularly we were sort of born digital. Finding enough digital talent was going to be difficult. So I actually created Native through a merger. I found the three best digital agencies that I could in South Africa, and then somehow persuaded them all to roll their businesses into one new company called Native. So we actually had some scale from day one, which
sort of
really
was
helped.
a bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Exactly. It was we kind of on day one we were already the big kind of digital agency, but we were still, as a digital agency, were the up and comer rather than the establishment. But then we used that scale to push against some of the incumbents.
That's interesting, but I know, like, from my years living in Brazil, it's still harder to convince companies to take risks on something like digital or innovation. How did you deal with that kind of convincing and that struggle, and how did that help inform what you do today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there is companies are nervous about taking risk in South Africa. Clients are nervous about taking risk, were slow to adopt digital in many ways. I don't know. I think that I've always just had a pretty clear view in my own mind of sort of where things are going, and I've just been passionate and determined to kind of convince other people of that trajectory. And I think that worked when I started the first web development company. It worked when I started what was essentially the first branded entertainment agency, and it started with Native, which was the first agency to say we're not a digital agency, we are a strategically led creative agency, but our ideas are born digital and they extend beyond the digital canvas. So we were an agency of record, but born from a digital foundation, and we were kind of the first ones to do that. I think it's just about sticking to your, knowing where you're going and sticking to your guns.
As sort of that agency, that digital innovative agency with a lot of the good talent in a smaller market, did you feel like you could you could actually experiment and move fast and learn fast?
Yes, I think more importantly though, what we got to do is we did some amazing work for global brands that I think became almost like trend-setting campaigns for those brands globally, because we were able to do things in South Africa that were more adventurous, that were more risky than. So, for example, Absolute Vodka was a big client of ours in South Africa. We did some groundbreaking work for them, which I think would have been very, very difficult to do in the US or the UK. But because we were in South Africa and we were flying a little bit under the radar, we could kind of get away with being a bit bolder. And I think that boldness, set the brand on fire. And I think the rest of the world then looked at it and went, actually, that's kind of the way the brand should be acting in other markets as well.
So sort of being under the radar was maybe one of the advantages.
Definitely. I think being under the radar is one of the big advantages, when you are in a smaller market. You can use the smallness and underdeveloped nature of your market, as a kind of a force, sort of, like jiu-jitsu, use your opponent's energy against them.
Yeah, tell me more about that. I know you wrote an essay in the book about that.
Yeah, so there was an essay that I wrote called "Advertising Ninjutsu," operating in the shadows, and I think that was really about the fact that in smaller markets, and sometimes that may not be, operating in a smaller market. It may just be an agency that is working on a smaller brief, rather than seeing these things as small and feeling limited by them. Be grateful for the fact that you maybe have. You have some shadows to cover you, and you can use that to do really, really interesting work. And I think, we did that on a number of occasions, and I try to keep that as a philosophy in everything I'm doing. Is don't try and change everything all at once. Find little opportunities that are maybe little less risky, a little less in the sort of in the main view of who of what you're doing, and use that as a way to push the boundaries a little.
But now you're at a big agency. How do you keep that ninja mentality and bring that to this place in Columbus Circle, Midtown?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, because I think what's super important to me, as someone who believes in that, kind of creative ninjutsu or jiu-jitsu, or whichever way you want to look at it, that comes from being entrepreneurial. And I think I never want to lose my entrepreneurial spirit. I never want to lose the ability to kind of look for those opportunities and to try to really engender that attitude in everyone that works here. So I think to not allow our scale to get in the way of our ability to be nimble and to take risks and to look for new opportunities. I think, that's a huge fear of mine, that the scale would, make us corporate and lose that edge. So I think it's just about keeping that entrepreneurial spirit, being wanting to sort of rebel against the status quo and engendering that in everyone else and getting them to believe that they have permission. We don't come to work to make ads. We come to work to reinvent the future of business, and that's everyone's job in this agency.
What are a few things you do to try to engender that in the organization?
So I think one of the things, and it's a constant process, but it is reminding people of the power that we have in what we do to actually make real, tangible change to our clients' businesses and to society and the world at large, and then to remind them that regardless of what the brief might say, your job is to understand the brief behind the brief, the problem behind the brief, the opportunity behind the brief, and then to attack that with all of the skills and capabilities you have, even if they're not things that exist inside the walls of this building. Like, we shouldn't be limited by the skills and capabilities we have. If you see an opportunity or a challenge that can be solved by partnering with someone outside, then go and find those people and partner with them and come up with a solution that no one else could have come up with.
Yeah, the main thing in a lot of these conversations I'm having, people are talking about 3-second ads, 2-second ads. So how do you see that playing out with long form and short form?
So, I think that when people generally, if you're a creative director or, a creative leader in this business, they'll ask you, were you an art director or a copywriter? Which side did you come from? I came from neither. I came, up as a director, and I think that's a huge asset for me personally, because I think everything is storytelling, and obviously film is such a great canvas for storytelling that I learned to tell stories by writing feature film scripts and directing feature films and television, and so that definitely colors my perspective on things. At the same time, I'm not a huge fan of the 30-second broadcast TV ad. Mm-hmm. Not because I don't like short form video, and that in these days that's long form, not short form. but not because but because I think that bought media tends to make people lazy. The fact that you are guaranteed a certain amount of eyeballs simply because you've bought that media spot makes you lazy in terms of the content you're creating. When you're making video that has to travel through earned media, that has to be watched and shared because of its innate goodness, it makes you work all that much harder. I think that what's happening with video now in terms of the different formats and ways that you can use it is super exciting. But I think the principles remain the same.
Yeah.
You got to either tell a good story or have a good idea or a great insight that allows you to connect with people in an emotional and relevant way.
Looking back, what's been the most exciting in the past 18 months or so?
Potentially the idea of dynamic content optimization and kind of, video that is personalized or customized on the fly using AI, etc. That's potentially an interesting idea. I don't really see anything interesting in that space at the moment. It feels like, robots making movies, not very interesting. Yeah. But the idea that we can start to generate stuff algorithmically that is a response to the way an audience is responding to the content, and the content then responds to the way the audience is responding, is kind of interesting. But for me, it comes back to the basics, like the things that I see that are the Nike Dream Crazy ad. Yeah. There's nothing about that ad that is particularly special as an ad, but it contains an ethos that was incredibly compelling and engaging to people. So I don't think, for me, it's not, the all of the different formats, whether it's vertical video or horizontal video or short form or contextual or dynamically optimized. None of that is really what's interesting to me. What's interesting to me is what is the real human insight? What is the human truth behind this? And how is it articulated in order to connect with people in a way that makes them want to watch, that makes them want to share? And that goes, that transcends format, it transcends technology, it transcends executional style. And I don't think, no matter how these things change, that is not going to change. That's going to remain the most important thing.
What's the biggest bullshit conversation or advice people are giving people in the industry now?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of of what's happening at the moment in terms of the way AI is being applied to creativity, to the creation and distribution of content. I don't not believe that it has potential. I believe that there's massive potential, but at the moment, programmatic media and I just, it's like I don't want to be hounded by the pair of fucking sneakers that I just bought a pair of sneakers and now it's following me around Instagram and it's following me around Facebook and that stuff is super annoying. I think in the same way that interruption marketing was irritating to people, programmatic is becoming even more irritating. And that approach to programmatic is now being extended into dynamic content optimization and into contextual marketing. And, we're being so clever with this stuff, but actually I think that it's currently at a state where we're just irritating people. So irritating me.
Everyone wants this solution that just does it for you so you can sit back and relax.
Yeah, I mean, I think the notion that we can serve more relevant content to people is great. I totally buy that. The more relevant the content is, the more engaged people will be. But at the moment, so Brian Eno had this great quote. He was at Cannes a couple of years. He said that generations become defined by the technological inadequacies of the time. So if you think of the 1920s, you kind of imagine a black and white, grainy black and white world. Why? Because the films at that time were defined by the fact that they were black and white and they were not very good film cameras, etc. And so you think of that generation that way. I think the technological inadequacies of AI now are sort of defining the world that we're in. Is the idea of more relevant content is great, but that's not what I'm seeing at the moment. I'm just seeing stuff that's pretending to be more relevant but is less relevant. And when you presume to know what I want and get it wrong, that's more annoying than if you don't.
Yeah. What are the types of things that are the right way to go?
So it sounds like a bit of a stuck record, but I think it does come back to, for me, it always comes back to insights. I mean, it seems like such an over-traded thing to say, but the truth is that every single true connection is born out of a true human insight, and the idea that somebody is going to be triggered by something, that thing that a universal truth about humanity that connects with people. If you've got that, if you have that deep human insight, you can weave a story around it. You can, and obviously, in the world of brands, it needs to be a deep human insight that is relevant in some way to what you're trying to say about the brand or what you're trying to get people to think about the brand. But if you can find that, if you take movies, I mean, the movies that we love are the movies that speak to our humanity and speak to us about universal human truths. It's the same about the ads that you love. They at their core, they have a great human truth. They have a great insight. And whatever technology we use, whether we make it horizontal or vertical or 2 seconds or 10 seconds or 5 hours or whatever it is, it has to contain that human truth at its core.
Yeah, and what do you say to the filmmakers out there? A lot, on Storyhunter went to film school like you. What advice do you have for them in this future, this new world order?
So, I mean, my biggest advice is that you have to make, if you're making branded anything, branded content, branded experiences, ads, whatever they are, make them good enough that the audience would be prepared to pay for them. Don't make an ad thinking, oh, well, someone's going to watch it because they have to. Make things that are good, the same way a Hollywood studio or anyone else would make a piece of content that is good enough for people to pay for it. If it's a piece of music, something they'd be willing to buy. If it's an experience, something they're willing to, pay for a ticket for. The same with film, because ultimately people are paying for this content. They are paying for this experience. They're paying with their attention, and that's their most valuable commodity. So if you have the audience in mind and you say, this thing that I'm making is going to be good enough that someone would be willing to pay for it, then you're 50% of the way there. But it has to be an equally good investment of time by the audience and an equally good investment of money by the brand. And if you do that, I think you've got a piece of branded entertainment that can work.
Yeah. Is there anything, I know, like, I'm not going to say, like, what's the secret of storytelling, but is there anything recently that you've kind of realized yourself, like that this is actually something that I undervalued at a time, like, for branded entertainment when creating it?
Again, it's gonna sound hugely reductive, but emotion. It's like, I spent a lot of time, I think, being quite taken by, cerebral thoughts or amazing visual style that kind of, you look at and you go, wow, that's beautiful, or it's beautifully shot, or it's incredibly edited, or I've never seen something done that way. I love all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, how did it make me feel? I had a producer who said to me, you judge good advertising by how it feels in your body. And I think that's right. When you're looking at a piece of film, or you're looking at a piece of video or an ad or whatever it is, don't think about it first. Just feel it. And that's the truth.
Yeah. I had an editor back in the day who would say, I'd be like, so what do you want from this piece? He'd be like, make me cry.
Exactly. And the thing is, I think the great thing about emotion is that there are many different kinds of emotion, and make me cry is certainly one of them.
That's the news side.
Yeah. No, I think, make me cry, make me laugh, make me feel proud, make me feel nostalgic, make me feel that sense of the, sort of triumph of the human spirit. And I think often with brands, that idea of triumphant, that feeling of triumph is sometimes better than a feeling of nostalgia or crying. But make me feel. Make me feel.
All right. Make me feel.
Thank you.
Great chatting.
Thanks, man.